Happy New Year, wine and podcast fans. I'm Jeff Davis. Let's head out on the wine road.
The thing down here, though, is that it's just a different vibe, you know? There aren't a lot of, big corporate names down here. Most of the growers down here are small family-owned operations.
There's some new Rhone varieties, white Rhone varieties that nobody's really heard of, at least not yet. One is called Pic Pool, and one is called Bourbelanc. I'm still trying to find somebody crazy enough to plant some Bourbelanc to kind of round out the portfolio for me.
Today we're traveling down the California coast to the Santa Ynez Valley, more specifically the Santa Rita Hills north of Santa Barbara. I took this trip in October with my sister Julie, who came up from San Diego. We hit a few wineries and tasting rooms, and I interviewed winemakers and family members of Melville Vineyards and Winery and Babcock Winery and Vineyards. Aside from the Santa Rita Hills AVA, there are 3 other official wine regions in the Santa Ynez Valley. Happy Canyon of Santa Barbara, that sounds like a fun place, Ballard Canyon, and the Los Olivos district. I chose Babcock and Melville in the Santa Rita Hills because I was very interested in seeing Babcock's large tasting room stuffed with 20th century relics and rock and roll posters and albums, as well as their soul-struck lounge, and to hear Bryan Babcock's ideas on terroir and reforestation, which includes everything from oak trees to butterflies. We'll talk about that later on. And this past year, Wine and Spirits magazine chose Melville as a top 100 winery. That worked out well because I was planning to go to the Top 100 tasting event in San Francisco just days before our trip to Santa Barbara, so it gave me a chance to meet Chad Melville in person at the event. During the interview, I felt compelled to say once again, congratulations on being a Top 100 winery.
Appreciate it. Yeah, it's a great honor, you know, to be recognized like that. It's funny. Some of my friends have reached out and they're like, hey, congratulations, you know, top 100 in the U.S. and
in the world.
I know, that's what I said. I was like, oh, thanks. And I was like, wait a minute, it's the world, you know? We work hard. We love our work, right? It's always nice to be recognized, you know? But the best feeling isn't necessarily a score or an award or recognition like that. The best feeling is when you get an email from someone that you don't know that says, you know, they just had their wine for this special celebration and they had it at such and such location and the wine just blew them away or whatever. Like those little things right there, I think those are the ones that really make me happy or warm the heart. You know, those are the stories or the recognition that nobody else gets to see, but you know you've made a connection to someone. You had an impact on, you know, their evening or their life or whatever, in some way or another.
I hope you've inspired my listeners to do the very thing.
Yeah, well,
reach out to those that impress you.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, that's what this is all about, right? I mean, it's just wine. It's not like that complicated or crazy, but it's all about, you know, being happy, like we started off saying, or you know, living a life of happiness, right? You got to appreciate what you have, you know, and you eat well and drink well, right? It adds a lot to enriching your soul, really, you know?
That's a good way to look at it. It's nice to know the Accolade is stroking his soul rather than his ego. He's winemaker Chad Melville of Melville Vineyards and Winery. As we move from the outdoor fermentation space to the barrel room, complete with rock music in the background to keep everyone motivated during harvest, you'll hear Chad talk about the vineyard aspect of their business. It's how they started and is the foundation of Melville.
We're 100% estate, right? We own our own land. We do our own farming. We don't purchase any fruit. Never have.
Nice.
And the fact that we do our own farming is a huge part of it. I mean, a lot of people own their land, but then they hire a farming company. So we that's where we come from. We come from wine growing. We come from farming. We come from the vineyard, right? The winery was really kind of secondary to us. But when we decided to do the winery, we consciously made the decision to be estate.
Right.
To really kind of emphasize that, we don't use any new oak at all, right? So the idea is you're translating what the vineyard is saying. Again, everything is based off of the wine growing. We're in a really unique area in terms of, the Santa Rita Hills, right? Long, cold growing season. Mm-hmm. We start like at the end of February, bud break, right?
We did that early.
Yeah. And then, we're picking Pinot Noir today, and it's October 15th, right? I mean, and we still have like another week to go, and that's all normal, you know? And then Syrah for us doesn't come in until November and even middle November. I've even picked it in December before, so it's a long grow season.
Definitely.
And that means it's cold, right? Because if it was hot, then the grow season would be short, right?
Sure,
So,
yeah. And it's funny how up in Northern California, it's a shorter growing season.
yeah, everywhere else it is. I mean, this is the longest growing season that I know of, and I study this stuff. It doesn't mean it's better than anyone else. It's just what makes this area unique.
Although they say the longer hang time, the more complex the flavors are.
It can be. I mean, the longer the hang time, the more ability you have to nail like perfect ripeness, because you get skin and seed, and in our case, stem ripeness. It's all on different paces. So the longer, the colder it is, the slower the pace is, but then the bigger the bullseye, nailing it. Where if you get a lot of heat, you get dehydration, you get a lot of other stuff, but the tannins don't react to the heat. Tannins are still developing regardless of how hot it is, really, essentially, So those are the main things, right? Estate, neutral wood, and neutral here is really neutral. It's 10 to 20-year-old barrels. Right. A lot of people consider like 5-year-old or 4-year-old barrels neutral, and that's fine. There's no clear definition, but for us, 10 to 20-year-old barrels are really neutral.
That cuts down on the cost.
It does for the winery, but it doesn't for the vineyard. We spend a crazy amount of time, which is money, in the vineyard to get the fruit perfect so that we don't have to use new oak.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
You'd be stupid to use only neutral wood if you were working with average fruit, right? So yeah, you would save money there, but what's being translated then isn't necessarily a premium product, right? So if the goal is, grade A sushi, that you get it and then all you do is cut it and put it on a plate. You don't sear it, you don't sauce it, you don't do anything to it, right? So it's more of that mentality, So you could say, oh yeah, you save a lot of money in your kitchen by not having any, ovens because you don't need to cook. It's like, yeah, but we're also spending a ton of money on the fish.
Right.
So that's the difference.
Sure.
It's a bummer for us. As a matter of fact, I was talking to our CPA again. He's always pushing for get machines, because we can depreciate that. You can't depreciate labor, like blah blah blah. And it's like no. We're committed to doing everything by hand because it's as highest quality you can get. But this last part that I keep mentioning that I haven't really emphasized yet is the stem inclusion, right? So estate, neutral wood, and stems, and the stems are really where we get a lot of our aromatic. Complexity, savory tones. We also get a lot of structure from the stems too. Again, not using new wood where people would rely on new wood to give it aromatic lift, to give it some texture, some sweetness, and then give it some tannin as well. We're not doing that, right?
So that makes sense now to me that with the stem use, you don't need the new oak as much for that.
Exactly, right? And so again, this area, the long cold grow season, we're on really well-drained, low-nutrient soils. We compact the vineyard in there and plant it very densely. There's a lot of competition for the water, the moisture, the sunlight, the CO2 gas. We farm for getting our stems ripe. Not everything gets ripe, and that's okay. We destem that stuff. But the stuff that does get ripe, we embrace it. And we really look to that part of it to give the wines that savory aromatic and the structure, right? So, again, you're not just haphazardly doing something. It's very precise. It's a calculated risk, right? Sure. But the stems are a big part of it. So if you take those three main things, we really are not typical California wine producer. We're really more of an old world mental approach, right? But at the same time embracing beautiful California fruit,
But I also read that you're picking earlier now to retain some freshness and a remarkable freshness quality to your wine. In my naivete knowledge, I was thinking, if you're picking earlier and you're using whole cluster with the stems, is there a balance there in trying to keep it from tasting a little green, a little too young?
For sure, yeah. So first thing is picking a little bit less ripe. We got to clarify, kind of what that means, right? And so over the years, we've been doing this for 22 years now, and over the years, you get to know your land better and better, right? And that really also means you get to know your winemaking better and better, right? You get to learn and understand what works best for all these different variables. I like to believe that every year we get better at that, right? I mean, that's the goal.
Sure.
And so
And when you're 60, 70, you'll be saying the same thing.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so me personally, I find that that little tiny sweet spot, really now the target we're talking about now is getting smaller and smaller because our goal is perfection, right?
Yeah.
And at the same time knowing that perfection isn't really attainable, right? But this is that constant battle you have in your head as an artist, right? And so really then what I'm after is the best of both worlds, right? Is to have the complexity, to have the depth, have the concentration, have the savoriness, have the freshness, have the high acid, have, like the complete picture there. And I don't think that comes with wines that are overtly fruity or overtly ripe, but also not underripe either. It's a simple equation.
Yeah,
when you break
mentioned
it
a lot
down.
of variables there that you really have to, like
Yeah.
you're saying, just pinpoint that one
Yeah.
sweet spot.
And so that generally means, for Syrah on sand with those two clones at 100% whole cluster, usually means the best type of flavors, aromas, and character of like the soul of the wine really starts to show itself, kind of like in the 23, 24 range, but with some in the 25 range, which essentially equals about, 14.5% alcohol in that range, right? If I were picking that same exact fruit at 22 bricks at 100% whole cluster on sand, then yes, we'd be talking about the aroma flavor profile being way more towards like green pepper, more pyrazine, more weedy, more herbal, which is fine. It works for some people, I guess. But that's what I think was mentioned in the Wine and Spirits article, was that I'm picking a little bit less ripe to attain more freshness. It's simply just backing off of where we used to be. We used to be kind of more in the 25, 26 brick zone for that Syrah, which still works, though.
Sure.
Because of the acidity levels that we have here, the pHs are so low, the acidities are so high because of the cold climate. You get that natural acidity to balance out that like extra fat in the alcohol. Yeah. But I'm not doing that anymore. Really more after this kind of 23 to 25 zone with 100% whole cluster Syrah.
Well, I'd say he's close to perfection. We tried his Pinot Noir and Syrah at their tasting room in Santa Barbara, and both my sister and I preferred the Syrah. It was very good. The juice was concentrated with a pleasurable amount of acid and tannins. A nice finish, too. But how did they get to this point? Let's go back to the beginning. Chad's father, Ron Melville, started wine growing in Knights Valley in Northern California. But when it came time to make wine, he chose the cool climate region of the Santa Rita Hills. After buying the property in 1996, Chad and his brother had to join in on planting the vineyard. And with years of hard work and proving himself, Chad became the winemaker.
When I started working for my family in 97, it started, at the bottom, like with nothing, right? So, we drilled the wells, we put in the trellis system, we planted the vines. I mean,
it's a lot of work for it.
It's a lot of work. I was 25 at the time. We had a crew to help. They're tremendous. But you kind of map it out. Like you have like the best clones with the best rootstocks matched to the soil type, the elevation, the row orientation. Everything's on vertical trellis. We have almost 2,000 vines per acre. I mean, we did it all right, but you still don't know until you grow the fruit, and then you still don't know until you make the wine, and then you still don't know, really, until you age the wine,
And you're talking 5 to 7 years?
We're still learning, And so, for me, I've always had this fascination with the wine side of it, too. It wasn't just be the farmer. It was have one foot in the vineyard, one foot in the cellar, and really understand that connection, right? It'd be like a chef, raising their own meat and making their own cheese and having their own vegetable garden. When you can really understand all that stuff, you can't help but become a better chef, right? So
right.
The idea was, for me to always be involved in the winemaking, and I have been from day one here.
You had the same winemaker until he left?
Until he left, 3 years ago, which is, to answer your question, that's when I became the head winemaker here. But
you were already
I was
sprinting
already involved,
by that.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't know if you know this, my wife and I, we started our own brand in '02. It was called Samsara, small, and we made it off-site, different equipment, different location, did all that differently, separate, I should say. And so I was making wine back then too. So for me, the farming, the vineyard, like that is really like the heart and soul of this whole operation for me personally.
Right.
And the winemaking, to be honest, is a lesser degree of importance in terms of how this all comes together. I know a lot of people, most people out there, they always think of the winemaker as being the one, the magician, the one that like the lead singer in the band or the quarterback of the football team. But really, I take way more pride in the farming, like the offensive line or the bass
and
player.
You're working on that so many more months than the actual winemaking.
Yeah, and I mean that's where the magic happens. I mean that's where Mother Nature puts us all together. You have the opportunity to work with her if you want to, and you can take advantage of what she offers you. But this isn't about just receiving fruit and making it into wine and putting my stamp on it. Like I made that. Like I don't use those terms. It's always we, and it's wine growing. It's not wine making. But that's the way we look at it.
You have children?
Yes.
So others on the way, possibly.
Yeah. Well, right now my son is convinced he's playing wide receiver for the 49ers.
Hopefully they can use them at that point.
Yeah.
Or won't need them actually at that point. But.
What's fun, and my daughter who's 14, she wants to be a dancer or a nurse or a teacher. It just kind of depends on her mood. But what's fun about that is having those kids and exposing them to all these different things, food, culture, language, and watching their brains kind of churn and really kind of embrace it. They have an awareness for flavor and texture and aroma, and it's always my wife and I love to cook, and so it's always about showing them these different things. And so they don't know this, but I've been training them for years, and coming down this path of being a wine grower.
Well, I can't tell you how many stories I've heard where the children went off to college, had other plans, and then even just a couple of years later ended up back and working at the winery.
That's essentially what I did. I went to school for something different. I got into that industry for 3 years, and then I came back to the family. The funny thing is, my dad's super old school, really hardcore. When I came back to the family and said, "Can I work here for you?" he said, "You don't have any experience, why would I hire you?" And so I went off and worked for some other people, and then came back, and then he hired me. And to be honest, it's the same thing with my kids. If they want to work here, they totally can, but they need to bring something to the table.
Right.
This isn't just a place to come work. This is like, if you want it, you got to work hard for it.
Interesting. And, driving through here, it seems like there's a lot of room for the vineyards and wineries to grow and expand. Mm-hmm. So do you see that happening? Is it moving along slowly?
Yeah, there was a boom, in the mid '90s when we got involved. The economy was great, and so there was a boom there, and then there was a little bit of a lull, like when the economy softened up in 2008, 2009, and then now there seems to be another kind of little boom, or at least the starting of one. I don't know. The problem is there's not a lot of little pieces for sale. Now really what's for sale is, like 1,000 acres or something. So you really got to commit. But that doesn't mean that's always going to be the case. There's always going to be like little pieces that come on the market. But when you look at it from a bird's eye view, you see, wow, from like 1970 to 1990 to 2000 to 2018, there's a lot of vineyards that have been planted, but there's also a lot more land that can be planted.
Right.
The thing down here, though, is that it's just a different vibe. There aren't a lot of big corporate names down here. Most of the growers down here are small family-owned operations. You can pop into a winery really on any given time, and you'll see the owners of the winemakers, like they're around,
Yeah,
sure. It's just a different vibe. It doesn't mean it's better or worse. It's just it seems to be a little bit more approachable, a little bit more down to earth, a little bit more, I don't know, maybe earthy is a good word for it.
Well, hey, as my listeners can tell, you guys are still very busy here.
Yeah.
So, Chad, I just want to say thanks for your time and great storytelling, and wish you continued success here.
Thank you. Thanks for coming down. Thanks for visiting.
What a good guy. Chad of Melville Vineyards and Winery, a wine and spirits top 100 winery of 2018. They have a nicely designed tasting room and outdoor space for tasting and picnicking in Lompoc, and the other tasting room we mentioned near the pier in Santa Barbara. Their website is melvillewinery.com. And there you'll see, as Chad mentioned, they consider themselves wine growers, not wine makers. Next, I head to Babcock Winery, which is right next door. I didn't realize that when I chose these two, but boy, it sure was convenient. On the Wine Road continues in the Santa Rita Hills next. Welcome back to On the Wine Road. Today's venture took my sister and me to the Santa Rita Hills in the Santa Ynez Valley, north of Santa Barbara. My next interview is with winemaker Bryan Babcock of Babcock Winery and Vineyards. The genesis of Babcock began when Bryan's folks, Mona and Walter, purchased 110 acres. Just one of many things Walter would try in his life.
Right. Then 1979, I'm pretty sure, is when my mom and dad started planting the first vines. My dad was kind of a fearless Renaissance man, did a lot of interesting things in his life. He passed away a couple years ago, but he lived a great life. So dentist, restaurateur, commercial fisherman, winemaker, cattle rancher. To this day, I do run into ex-patients of his. Because, he practiced dentistry for quite a while there in Seal Beach, and so everybody knew who he was, and then with the restaurant and all.
From what I was reading, the wine business wasn't your first choice. What was your desired vocation in life at that time?
I really didn't know at that point. I was going through the whole issue of trying to figure out if I'm going to live at home for the rest of my life or feel like I live at home, with my parents, or am I going to, go to New York and become a stockbroker and I can get a real life, I thought.
So you fell somewhere in between, didn't you?
Yeah,
but we'll
exactly.
We'll get to that.
Exactly. I didn't know what I wanted to do, academically or professionally. I thought maybe doing an MBA at that point would be just a good idea after my undergraduate studies. The only problem I had there was I didn't get into, after applying to Stanford, Harvard, Chicago, and Wharton, I didn't get into any of them.
A little dejected at that point.
Exactly.
Now what?
So, but fortunately, I did have a major in biology, a minor in chemistry, really good in the sciences from Occidental College, and I took that up to University of California at Davis, and I started studying food science and winemaking, which was dovetailing with the fact that my family had a vineyard at that point. I did drive the tractor. I was becoming fascinated with wine and with Chardonnay and with Riesling and with all these things that we were doing. I mean, at that point, I was a fan of alcoholic beverages. So, sure. I just had to transition away from the beer to the wine.
It was a nice plan B that was already established.
It was a good default position. Yeah, it's great.
And do you find that biology and the chemistry really helped you working with the vineyards and such? Because I know a number of winemakers who have those degrees.
No doubt. I mean, the more knowledge you have, I think the better off you are. And if you are looking at integrating wine growing with winemaking, I mean, my God, there's just such an immense amount to know between plant science, plant physiology, soil science, agronomy, water chemistry, biochemistry, microbiology, biology in general. On and on and on. So the biology is just a wonderful place to start. And nowadays, I find myself having to become, with my new theory of my new approach of agroaesthetics, which is the treatment of an agricultural domain as a piece of art. So now I'm doing a lot of reforestation. So I'm having to become good with forestry and a whole slew of other species that are not even grapevines. We're designing butterfly sanctuaries. So we're studying different species of flowers and milkweeds. And so I'm having to become a better botanist and a better entomologist. And, of course, all these things are made easier if you have a foundation of biology.
And I imagine that's also what turned you on to getting really passionate about terroir.
about terroir and initially the fermentation itself. I mean, it's just, to this day, it's such a phenomenal event, such a fascinating thing when a juice starts to ferment and then it kicks in and it starts getting crazy and gassy. It's just, it's part of the season. It just comes around once a year, every year, where the winery is just filled with those aromas and things are just going off. And from that, really, while I was at Davis for a couple of years, that was really sort of my focus. And then coming back here, then I had to really learn how to be a farmer as well.
Speaking of terroir, tell me about the Limit Chardonnay. I heard that's kind of an interesting location for that plant.
The Limit is Block 31, specifically Block 31 at the Radian Vineyard. It's Clone 76 Chardonnay on a west-facing hillside that gets bombarded by cool air every day in the far western edge of the Santa Rita Hills. So it's a cool sort of wind-pounded site. So the vines are a little stressed. They're a little more compact canopy. It's the kind of thing that leads to really intense flavors and very distinct flavors. It's a great terroir. In fact, we are racking the 2018 juice today. It's once again incredible flavor, incredible acidity, and it's the kind of thing that just sets you up perfectly for a full-on Burgundian, barrel fermentation, malolactic fermentation, élevage on the lees for 9 months. And then if you're stable enough, we like to try to bottle those things without filtering them to really capture every little aspect of what we've built into the wine. And the Limit's just one of those great blocks of Chardonnay that makes, from a standpoint of raw materials, makes all that possible. Just taste the wine, and you'll understand why I call it the Limit.
On the website, he refers to the Limit Chardonnay as big fat liquid energy. Unfortunately, the 2016 vintage is sold out. The next The Limit will be released in spring of 2019. Aside from the typical cool climate wines, Bryan is also bottling Cabernet Sauvignon and Cab Franc. But there are some other varieties he's tried as well, in an effort to see what else might grow well there.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the spice of life. It's very rewarding, actually, to make classic wines and to make certain Chardonnays and certain Pinots exactly the way I made them last year and the year before and the year before. You can't argue with success, and I do think if you're a devotee of terroir, if you can sort of bring that up in the wine, then there's not too many reasons to stylistically alter that. So at the same time, you do that 20 years in a row, and then you start kind of looking around and scratching your head like, what else is going on around here? And so we do work with a number of different varieties from the warmer end of the St. Ynez Valley. We make a little Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, a tiny bit of Cabernet Sauvignon. There's some new Rhone varieties, white Rhone varieties that nobody's really heard of, at least not yet. One's called Claret, one is called Pic Pool, and one is called Bourbelanc. I'm still trying to find somebody crazy enough to plant some Bourbelanc to kind of round out the portfolio for me. But
it'd be tough convincing somebody of that.
Just a half acre. That's all I need. I'm not saying plant 20 acres of Bourbelanc, just a half an acre, just to get it on the label. So yeah, it's kind of the spice of life. And if you love winemaking, then you gotta take on some different things, and I think it actually makes you better at what you do in a basic way too, because you see more, you experience more. Good hitters, they hit the fastball, they hit the curveball. They hit it both.
No, I've heard that you don't like to play by the rules, and it seems like your soul-struck galvanized Synergy GSC is proof that you don't always like to stay within the lines.
Yeah, it's fun to kind of poke in the eye of tradition sometimes. GSM is at this point it's become kind of a paradigm. That's the blending of the Rhone varieties, Grenache, Syrah, and Mourvèdre. I have never really run into any Mourvèdre over in Saint Ynez that I thought was that great. And if I had my hands on access to great Mourvèdre, we do have great Syrah. And we have, now that we're starting with Grenache, I think we have some very promising Grenache. But rather than just do GSM to do GSM, I'm a Pinot guy anyway. So if I'm going to do something, it needs to be kind of interesting. And a few years ago, I did stumbled across some really interesting Carignan, which is arguably, perfectly historically, technically a Rhone variety, because that's probably a Spanish grape, Carignana. But there's enough of it in the Languedoc and in the Rhone. You can think of Carignana as a Rhone variety. Okay, I'll take it. And so we're making a GSC, Grenache Syrah Carignan, and then having some fun with the fact that we're, doing something a little different than everybody else.
I like that blend. It certainly has a freshness to it.
Yeah.
And I purchased that as well as the Pinot and your Cab Franc. But also, I couldn't pass up the Pinot Gris Naughty Little Nectar. That was really tasty.
Yeah. It was just a nice little late harvest project with a variety that you don't always see made into late harvest wine, Pinot Gris. Right. But it works well for us because it ripens early. And so if it ripens early and then we just forget about it, well, we'll do everything else, then when we come back to it, it's super, super sweet, super ripe. And it's in a position to
sets itself up for you.
Yeah, exactly.
And now and your, I don't know if it's your assistant winemaker, but Vic was telling me you're working on a little pet nat now.
We are for the first time. So we picked a little Pinot Noir, a little lower ripeness, and with a pet nat, the idea is it's like a bottle-conditioned beer or a bottle-conditioned wine. You bottle it right before it ferments all the way to dryness. So right before fermentation is complete, you want to bottle it with at least a little bit of sugar left so that the fermentation finishes in the bottle. And of course, it's got a cap on it, so the pressure builds up and it's sort of like a champagne, has bubbles. The other day, I opened up, because we didn't, this is a whole new learning curve. We just had these little crown capper things. I had like 5 guys with these little cappers, and so and some of the caps didn't go on tight enough, and so we had a bunch of leakers, and so I was just kind of trying to get a feel for, okay, what are we looking at here? I mean, this is only like a day after we'd bottled it. So I took one of the bottles that was leaking a little bit, and it was at room temperature, which was a mistake. And I walked into the lab and I opened it, and the next thing I knew, half the bottle was on the ceiling, and I was wearing the other half. So.
Yeah, you gotta be careful when you got pressure under.
We got a pretty good photo of me like pointing to like some stuff stuck to the ceiling. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing about those caps. They can pop open pretty easy sometimes.
Yeah, well, you learn your lesson. If the wine's chilled down, it's like opening champagne at room temperature. I mean, I wouldn't do that either, but I did. But it just didn't. It didn't translate into my mind. In Babcock, this stuff should be chilled down before you pop that cap, or it's going places. Yeah.
I like how on your website, in various paragraphs, you talk about your experimentation, trying to figure out who you are and what you're doing from decade to decade, your left brain versus your right brain. Yes. So are you feeling like you're getting it dialed in now after 30 years or so?
I feel like we're really good at making wine at this point. Our product is good, and I'm very proud of it. But at the same time, you get to this point, and then you do start to realize how much you still don't know. Like my farming is completely different than it was 10 years ago after just exploring with the possibility of trying to integrate Vitis, the vine, more with the forces of nature than against them. So like gravity, wind, these things that aren't going away but that are part of that system. I used to do what everybody else does, which is vertical shoot positioning, where you wire up the shoots, you force them to grow up against gravity every year. And now we start up higher and we let Vitis grow more or less naturally, and we've we've developed a system that really radicalizes the nature of the vine with gravity. Neither one of those things are going away. Those are fundamentals. So how can we develop a system that actually uses those things to our benefit? And so we've got a completely different farming system. And it's so simple. I look at it and it's really quite stupid how simple it is. And the one thing I scratch my head is, why did it take me 30 years to figure this out? Well, sometimes you think you kind of got it down, and then really... maybe if you just come at it from a little bit different perspective or study it a little more, you see, oh man, there's a whole other realm of opportunities out there. I just got to focus.
Yeah, you got to work with Mother Nature. It's a lot easier, isn't it?
I find it easier and more cost effective. Yeah.
It's an interesting concept, and I don't think I've seen it anywhere else, where he lets the vine shoots grow downward instead of forced up vertically. And he has the trellis high enough that the vineyard workers don't have to bend over to pick. I'll be interested to see if that concept catches on. On their website, you'll see their vineyard tasting room full of mid-century furniture, antiques, records, and then there's the Soul-Struck Lounge. You know, I like visiting modern tasting rooms, but I also have an appreciation for antiques, so you'll hear their style really appealed to me.
Yeah, there's Lisa has a lot of soul, and it shows. You know, she's very spiritual. She loves color. She loves art. And is great. And she loves people. She loves creating the atmosphere. She loves to see this place full. You know, when the noise level picks up, then it's like, wow, okay, this is what it's supposed to be. And this room really was an inspiration for me in the development of my approach toward agri-aesthetics. She's basically Lisa's taken a 5,000 square foot warehouse, which used to be full of barrels when we were making twice as much wine as we should have, because the distribution is just not fun, and I was hating life and making too much wine. We cut our production in half. Now we make better wine from better fruit, and we have a better, more direct audience. So we took the barrels out of this warehouse and gave Lisa the keys, and so she's really kind of created, in a way, a 5,000 square foot piece of art.
Yeah.
And so...
Did you have any idea when you gave her the keys that this is what it was going to be?
Well, I had some indication, because I look at what's in my home every day, you know, and Lisa's style is definitely prevalent in my home as well. But here it's almost a little out of control here. This is very spontaneous and really fun. And it was an inspiration to me to start to broaden my horizons. It's like, well, if Lisa can do this with a 5,000 square foot warehouse, why can't I do this with 110 acres of ground? You know, and maybe not every acre needs to have a vineyard on it. Maybe some oak trees, maybe some flowers, you know, maybe some beauty. Because I think that's really what people want. You know, they want not only good product, they want an experience. I think that's what's really driving the new phenomenon of agritourism. People, you know, they don't want to just go drive up into a room and taste wine. They want to see vineyards. They want to see mountains. They want to see forest. And what I'm trying to do here is construct a periphery of forest around the vineyard. And hopefully someday we'll have a little trail map. And, you know, you can just go down to the hillside right here to the butterfly sanctuary, or go on the hour-and-a-half long walk, and there'll be interesting visual things to see and contemplate along the way, and picnic tables and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm all about that.
You're giving back to nature and thanking Mother Nature for helping you out.
Absolutely, and it's being made possible by the development of the Santa Rita Hills at the same time. So it's the man-made now that's making it possible for me to kind of go back and do things like plant some oak trees. I don't have to grow every ounce of every ton of grapes. I have all these stunning vineyards to work with, and, growers that can grow it just as well as I can. In some cases, depending on the soil, if not better. So. It's a great time to be in the Santa Rita Hills and be as inspired, I think, as we are at this point.
Both Bryan at Babcock Winery and Vineyards and Chad at Melville Vineyards and Winery are putting forth a great effort to utilize best practices and represent the Santa Rita Hills wine region extremely well. Check out BabcockWinery.com to see the wine, the tasting room, and the Soul-Struck Lounge. I hope you enjoyed this podcast from the Central Coast of California. You can catch my previous interviews at onthewineroad.com. You'll find some other fodder on my Facebook page, On the Wine Road. You can follow me on Instagram at JD Wine Road and on Twitter at JD Wine Road. I sure hope you're looking forward to more ventures with me in 2019. I'm Jeff Davis.